Holy December, Batman. Now, real quick, before we dive into this past year's recap on the launch series here, which is my solo episodes digging into Francesco and I's first entire year, focusing more specifically on growing our ceramics business, Carra Terra, just in case this is the first time you are hearing about the launch series. But before I peel back the curtain on all of the things that started and stopped and started again and didn't start again, the goals we accomplished and the things that still, well, are waiting patiently, I want to take a quick second to mention something I said at the very end of our previous episode that might have gotten lost in the shuffle there all the way at the end. For the past year, you've heard me talk on and off about our community, our online home for fellow makers who are also trying to figure out how the heck to make a living from the things we make. It's not a Facebook group, and in fact, it's not on social media at all, which frankly is part of what I love so much about it. Because it's a place where we can focus and have deep dive conversations and actually get to know one another in a way that feels safe and allows us to be open, honest, and frankly, often vulnerable in a way that for me personally, I haven't found anywhere else on the internet. One of our members, Connie Cole from 2 Cent Ceramics, recently described it as a unique global community that still has a small town feel, which I really love. And if you want to hear more descriptions from fellow members, you can pop over to makersplaybook.com/community to read more. But the point of my bringing this up right now, before the meat and potatoes of this week's episode, is because we are making some big, exciting, member-requested changes to the community next year. I'm going to be bringing in outside educators to host masterclasses on everything from writing your artist statement and finding your voice to my favorite Instagram strategy expert that I've worked with one-on-one. I'm also going to be sharing my own way of setting and, more importantly, following through on my own business goals year after year. It's the process that allowed me to write and launch the Maker's Photography Styling System 3 years ago when I was still absolutely full-time in the event photography business and we were in the middle of moving houses while we were temporarily living with my parents, and basically it was just utter chaos. That type of system, though, is probably obvious that it's not a one-time thing. It's not a take this course and all your problems will be solved sort of lesson. Frankly, most of being a small business isn't that kind of a one-off lesson. Anyone promising that is probably just selling you something. My goal setting process is a year-long check-in that I do for myself every quarter and almost every week. It should be every week. And I'll be sharing that live in the community for the whole year. So that way we can make sure that together we keep taking those everyday baby steps that wind up getting you to the finish line of your big projects and your big dreams. There are a lot of other ideas that are getting put into place inside of the community as well, based directly on our member feedback from the last couple of years that I'm just really excited about. Our members have a lot of good ideas, you guys. But I won't keep rambling on here about those because they will all just make more sense once you can take a look within context of what's happening inside of this very special online home. So to the point, providing more and more resources for our members, well, frankly, it takes more financial resources to do as well. Because some of these masterclasses with outside educators aren't going to cost a thing to our members. But that's not to say that I'm not getting those educators paid, all right? So, all this to say, next year, Most likely at the beginning of February, our membership rates to the community will be changing. But our current community members already know their rates are locked in. So if you've been thinking about joining us inside of the community, now is the time. It's currently $27 a month USD or $270 for the whole year, which means you get 2 months free. For however long you keep your membership, even when the rates change in February, you will get to keep this year's price. Cool. As always, you can learn more at makersplaybook.com/community, or you can shoot me an email and ask me any questions you might have at hello@makers-playbook.com. Now let's get on with this week's deep dive on our launch series right after a quick word from our sponsor.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solutions Supervisor at Amico Bread, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amico Bread. Find Amico glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Carra. As I mentioned at the beginning, this episode of The Launch is a reflection on the whole past year, which perhaps is a little bit early to be doing such a thing, given the holiday shopping season is happening right now. And it's proving to have a huge impact on our small business, in particular, obviously, on our sales at the moment. But while those sales are necessary and very much appreciated, and you can find them at carraterra.com/shop, it's also typically the exception to the rule for most of our small businesses out there. Now, while we might plan for higher sales this time of year, we also know it's not necessarily a sign that the rate of sales that we're seeing right now will continue to stay in January or in February. What I'm trying to get at here is recapping now. Well, it's a little bit more realistic in terms of the long game that is self-employment and making a living from the things we make. It's also a reflection of me finally taking my own advice, to be honest, and giving myself more realistic expectations of just how much I can get done in a day, or a week, or a month. Because after this recap, I'm going to be taking a bit of a season break here on the podcast. I know, you're logging more studio hours than ever before right now, and you need more podcasts to binge. I'm sorry. But we are also logging those studio hours. And if we're both going to get any reasonable amount of sleep between now and the end of the year, Francesco needs me on glazing duty while he throws 50 plates in time for New Year's Eve dinner, in partnership with a local restaurant here in Milwaukee. Yes, my friends, exciting success story number 1 for this year recap. We have officially partnered with our first restaurant. And yes, I did just take the time to find a place where I could download sound effects for use on a podcast just to celebrate this moment. Shall we hold for more applause? Okay, so let's get back to the point and recap this year first with the success stories, shall we? It's always better for the good news first, right? So, number 1, we restarted the Carra Terra email newsletters. You know how passionate I am about having an email list, my friends. Now, I will admit, this was not a perfectly monthly newsletter. It's not exactly once a month. Sometimes I missed a month or two, but it's semi-regular now. I don't have to reintroduce us when we hop into somebody's inbox because they remember us. Done is better than perfect, my friends, and you're probably going to pick up on the fact that that's going to be a common theme here. Additionally, in February, after I had yet again started and stopped and started and stopped the Carra Terra Instagram multiple times last year, we decided to double down and focus on in person markets in order to grow a local audience faster than it takes to grow an online audience. So the success here is the fact that we focused in person markets, but I guess it could kind of go over in the less successful column in the fact that it was because I was failing at Instagram. But we'll get to that later. Speaking of shows, we participated in 10 of them this year between the Milwaukee and the Chicagoland areas. Those shows have resulted in roughly about 4 custom dinnerware commissions that we're working on finishing right now. We launched our website with a shop so that we have a place other than Etsy to send this audience that we're growing from those local markets to, instead of sending them to Etsy, which is a platform we don't own. And side note, next year I am planning to do an entire episode just on Etsy alone. Because yes, we still use it and our own website. And there's a very specific strategic reason for that. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we officially partnered with our first restaurant. We might have a second one on deck, but it's a little too early to say that officially, so I hope I didn't just jinx it. And to be clear, that restaurant relationship actually did come from one of those in-person markets. But now, for the things that absolutely did not happen, I started but never published our wholesale website account. Additionally, at the start of the new year, our brand new high-fire kiln arrived, which is fantastic and far more efficient than the hand-me-down one from the 1970s that we were super grateful to have been offered from a family friend to have and use, but it wasn't always the most reliable. That being said, the reason this is in the didn't happen column is because we have absolutely not switched to cone 10 as intended. So we are still firing mid-fire clay and glazes. The last time I posted something on Instagram for Carra Terra, at least in our feed, was November 16th of this year. So not that long ago, but let's just put it this way. We have 63 posts total, which that may sound like a lot to some people, but to put it into perspective, as a full-time business, the Maker's Playbook Instagram has 450 total posts. Now, yes, the Maker's Playbook Instagram is about a year older than the Carra Terra Instagram, but even if we did the math and took off the difference in years, long story short, I'm just avoiding saying that I've been slacking. All right? Now, additionally, I had set a goal for the number of email subscribers I wanted to get our Carra Terra list up to this year, which was a reflection, of course, it wasn't a random number. It was a reflection of how many people we would want coming to the site and how many people would be ordering from the site, et cetera, et cetera. And we are absolutely nowhere close to that goal number. Like, we're not even halfway. Which, for those of you following closely along to this list and maybe the order of this list, it should come as no surprise, because where do you think that email list growth was going to come from? Sure, we might get a few signups on at markets, but a lot of it was going to come from Instagram, presumably. Anywho, next on the list of things that did not happen, we do not have a particularly smooth back-end system for inventory management across the various platforms that we use. Or frankly, communication between the parts of the process that Francesco is responsible for versus the parts of the process that I'm responsible for. And spoiler alert for anyone considering going into business with your spouse, this is kind of a big deal when it comes to stress and communication, and having a well balanced life when you are working with your partner. Needless to say, this is priority number one for Carra Terra in the new year on my responsibility list. Additionally, at the start of our markets this summer, I messed up collecting sales tax at shows that were in different states. That's a story for another episode, but thus, our accounting system is in general still a bit of a hot mess, at least for my standards. Especially when you think about the fact that this is a system that goes across various businesses. For example, there's still the photography work that I do, which is primarily a service, and thus doesn't entirely collect sales tax. It does have to collect a little bit of sales tax because I sell albums and prints and things like that, but that's a combination of things. On top of that, we have the online photography classes that I offer here at the Maker's Playbook, and we have our community memberships, both of which are digital products instead of tangible sales of the ceramics from Carra Terra. So, needless to say, it's a bit of a mess, and it just needs to be a better, cleaner, faster, more efficient system. And I did not get that going as much as I had planned this year. It started, it's not finished. Something else that did happen, but kind of feels like it needs to be filed in this less than positive outcomes column. Over the course of this year, we got more and more and more specific in our terms and store policies that we have listed inside of that Etsy shop. I'll dig more into this when I do the full episode that I'm planning for season 5, all about Etsy. But let's just say, such a large marketplace is a great way to immediately hone your customer service skills and, perhaps more importantly, learn what boundaries you want to set for your business. Okay, so to be honest, as I did this review, starting in about July, the time I personally spent on helping to grow Carra Terra, outside of the literal hours standing in a booth at a show, well, they massively diminished. Francesco is full-time in the studio, while I really have been more part-time, filling in when possible or prioritizing specific things when there is a hard deadline that I couldn't miss, thus sending that particular task to the top of the list. Now, that is all seriously changing in 2024. But for this year-end review right now, the whole year for me felt a bit like a start and a stop and a start and a stop inside of my brain. What we have accomplished, despite all of my feelings of starting and stopping, is still pretty darn amazing, especially our dream of partnering with restaurants. But when we really dig into the numbers, we aren't quite sustainable yet. And while I am 100% a quality over quantity person, while I know from personal experience of multiple businesses that you can build a viable business without being a social media star or even without having tens of thousands of followers, even having less than 5,000 followers, you should go look at my wedding photography Instagram sometime. With all that being said, there is a certain point at the beginning where you do simply need a large enough audience from somewhere to sustain enough sales to keep paying the bills. But that's not entirely the point of my preparing this recap for you. Although, if you do want to buy a holiday gift for a bestie or you want to add to your own mug collection, then you are more than welcome to come visit carraterra.com/shop. But the point of my peeling back the curtain a little bit more than I really am comfortable doing, if that's not obvious in the way that I'm speaking, because after all, I'm the systems person, right? I'm the woman who can systems her way into fully checking off the to-do list every time, no matter how busy the days are. Well, The point of sharing all of this is to showcase to you all of the ways in which starting and growing your own small business isn't always a straight line that goes up and to the right on a graph. You might start and have a ton of momentum at the beginning, like you are running up a steep incline without ever even getting winded. And then you might hit the peak of that incline and realize you need to slow the pace for a little bit. You might start something and realize, oh, shoot, now that I'm selling more online, I actually need a much better packaging setup because I'm wasting way too much time fighting with the damn tape dispenser. Hypothetically, of course. Seriously, get a good tape dispenser, my friends, if you plan on selling any significant amount of pottery on the internet. But I digress. If hearing about these starts and stops and less than perfect fluid systems makes you feel a little bit anxious because you want to make sure that you have all the things figured out before you take this leap into starting a business, even if it's just a side hustle, if you want to make sure that you never have to apologize to a customer because you've made a mistake, well, boy, do I understand that feeling. Francesco and I are both the type of people who want to research and figure something out before starting. So we do, which delays the thing from getting started. We research and we research some more, and then, frankly, Francesco researches even more than that, and I start to get anxious about getting it started. And you know what happens? We start the darn thing and realize that all that research, well, maybe it helped a little, but actually, we learned 10 times more information just by doing the darn thing. Now, I'm not saying that you should just quit your job right now and go full time in ceramics without preparation. No, 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 my friends. Let's make that clear. But what I am saying is that maybe you could share a few of your pieces on a platform like Instagram or Etsy without having your entire shipping and packaging system sorted out from the very beginning. Maybe you could just dip your toe in a little bit. For 99% of us, once we finally put something up on the internet, for example, odds are it probably won't go viral immediately. Meaning, you'll have time to gradually learn, improve, and adjust accordingly. For example, while yes, we are selling a rather obscene amount of our giant mugs right now on Etsy, 95 in the last 30 days to be specific, they did not sell nearly that fast when we first began the listing a couple of years ago. Years ago, my friends. We've grown into this speed, and we've adjusted a lot along the way. Starts and stops. Sometimes a start, and then silence. And then maybe a little gentle knock on the door. And then another knock a few days later, but then maybe a long stretch of silence, followed by a knock once a day all of a sudden. Now, if you couldn't hear it, all of a sudden was in air quotes just there. What the internet shows us of makers and creators who seem to constantly be growing and constantly pushing, well, I don't know how real it is for most of the people out there. Sure, maybe there are a few that are really constantly up, 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 more with their business. But I'd wager a bet that before the constant growth phase that they're currently in, perhaps their business was still a messy start and stop and start and pause phase that I'm currently in. For example, back on episode 308, Kate Schrader told me about making jewelry. Did you know that Kate once made jewelry? Because I sure didn't before we had that conversation. And you wouldn't be able to tell now looking at her beautifully consistent Instagram, full of the cutest little plants on mugs that are really more like small sculptures rather than drinking vessels, right alongside these super clever mid century mod incense burners. In fact, Kate's husband has quit his job at this point and they work together now. She has help in the studio. Kate's making time to play and experiment with new ideas and producing ridiculously clever new objects because of it. It sounds like a capital G goals. Am I right? Of course. But don't forget, years ago, Kate sat at market booths weekend after weekend. And she not only sold ceramics, but she also kind of tested out a jewelry line for a while there. Now, in hindsight, it seems sort of random when we think about it. And yet, it was all just a step on this windy, windy path that is making a living from the things that we make. So, the point I am trying to make is also sort of twofold. Number one, particularly for those of you listening along in real time, right now, it's the end of the year. And all of the posts about there being X number of days left in 2023 to crush your goals and all of that, well, it's okay if you don't. All of the things that I just mentioned that we have not finished for this year, I'm not losing sleep in the next 3 weeks just to try and finish them so I can tick them off of a list to say I did it in 2023. January 1st isn't actually all that different from December 31st. If you hit a stop sign on this path of yours this year, it's okay. You can always restart. You can always restart before or after January 1st. Number two, and what I was really getting at, my original point of this entire episode, if you started and stopped and started again, it's okay. You might need to stop again in the future. And as you've already proven to yourself, remember this, you can also start again too. If you're making whatever amount of forward progress, even in the smallest of ways, even if it's forward progress that feels backwards, because what you're actually doing is taking care of yourself, it's still a step forward. There have been moments this year when we celebrated taking 2 big steps forward, only to feel like there was 1 step backwards a few minutes later. It happens. This whole making a living from the things we make thing is not a straight line. And honestly, there's no way to really figure out the perfect straight line until you start. Speaking of starting, let me just paint the picture a little bit more for you before we wrap this up. I had had an Etsy account for years before Francesco and I started using it. I would put up my super random, whatever I wanted to make that month recently at my community studio type of pieces without any consistency, without any strategy, and whatever I wanted to do. I wasn't worried about it. I had the account like that for 3 years. I would get the occasional sale from some random person on Etsy that somehow found the listing, but more often than not, it was a way for my mom to be able to share a link with her friends who might buy a piece from me. Or for a distant cousin to ask me if I could make a custom order of espresso cups for Christmas one year and be able to send me money for it. In 2021, with Francesco in the US with me, we got more serious about actually using the platform. I did a bunch of research on SEO within the Etsy platform, and with a bit of that research and a bit of luck, we got the giant mug ranking pretty high in search. And for a while, that's all we were really selling. Now, it's still a huge majority. Only in the past few months have we really started seeing traction on some additional items that we tried to list there. And only since July have we had a full shop on our own website. In case you were just half listening there and I was rambling for too long, that's 2 years where the only place we sold anything, even as full-time self-employed making people, was on Etsy. When we did move to in-person markets, we added our own online shop. Now, I can't even bring myself to say that we officially have added an Instagram account because while it exists, the thing I've dropped the ball the most on since starting that account in May of 2022 is posting any semblance of consistency on that Instagram. But that's okay. Other things have been working. I'm going to keep telling myself that it's okay. Now, I need you to hear that once more. I have dropped the ball on our ceramics Instagram account almost entirely. And it's okay. It's not because I don't know what to do. It's not because I don't see the value or the opportunity or the importance. It's just that something had to give. Despite my efforts to organize my days in the absolute most efficient way in order to maximize my time and my productivity, as it turns out, there's still only so much time in the day. I know, shocker, right? And amidst the starts and the stops and the setting so much else up in our business over this last year, while also keeping 2 other businesses running, remember? Well, Instagram for Carra Terra just frequently didn't make the top of the list. And once again, that's okay. Right now, as I'm recording this, Francesco is downstairs in the studio making plates for a restaurant. Our dream that we most definitely did not even put on the annual goals list because we didn't even think it would happen so soon is happening. On top of that, I've made some very tangible changes for myself to be able to start the new year focused on what we want life to look like for the long term, not just the immediate checking account gain. And yes, I'm being vague about that because it's still new and while exciting, it's also still a bit anxious feeling. And as you heard me say at the very start of this episode, that kind of vulnerability is better suited in safe places, which for me, on the internet, is inside of our community. So I'll just leave you with that. Now, obviously, I kept all of these starts and stops focused specifically on Carra Terra because that's what this launch series is all about, our actual ceramics business. Naturally, I've had similar successes and pauses over with the Maker's Playbook as well. Not the least of which is the fact that I am acutely aware that I started the year talking publicly about how I was going to launch not 1, but 2 new photography courses to continue helping fellow makers take better photos faster. And here we are in December. Those courses are coming, but it's going to be in 2024. I will say that I know the very first one that will be launching is going to be a 1-day masterclass about how to use a regular DSLR camera, how to use it in manual. Just like we did with the styling course, I'll be opening up the first cohort to a small group so that we can test run and figure out anything that's confusing or any glitches that I need to make clearer with the material. And you guessed it, the first people to have the chance to join that test cohort of the DSLR Masterclass are going to be our community members. Second, if there's still space, will be the makers who have opted in to being alerted to our courses on our email list. So if you want to find out about courses specifically before almost everyone else, with the exception of our community members, you can visit makersplaybook.com/waitlist to simply add your email to the list for free. No obligations, no anything else. It's just a list to get an email alert. But like I said at the start, if you want to come join the nicest, most supportive, but also realistic makers on the planet, and get the absolute earliest behind the scenes, give me your opinion on what I do so I can take it into consideration when I'm doing the next new thing for the Maker's Playbook. That kind of behind the scenes access at a lower rate that isn't going to be around for very much longer, well then please come join us over at makersplaybook.com/community. I have honestly been sitting here trying to figure out a more nuanced way to wrap this up, but frankly, it's December. And since this podcast from the very beginning has always been about giving you a peek into what it's really like to make a living from the things we make, well, frankly, my brain is tired. And there is only so much creative thought I have left, which I apparently used up for the majority of this episode and left none of that creative thought for the ending. So here we are. My friends, I cannot wait to see where 2024 takes all of us. Together, we really can do this. I am so excited for all the plans that I have in store to bring more resources to all of you and get to see all of you succeed, both here on the podcast, over on IG, inside of our community, and even more structured courses. But I'm also excited to have the amazing support from so many of you that remind me when it's okay to take a breather and get some rest. So until we return with season 5 of the podcast, I hope you're taking care of yourself amidst this crazy time of year and beyond this time of year as well. Don't forget to drink enough water, and please do try to get a reasonable amount of sleep. Like, seriously. Yes, even you, my parent maker friends. Perhaps especially you, my parent maker friends. Now, if you want to make sure you get the newest episodes as soon as season 5 starts up next February, I know that sounds like a really long way away, then be sure you're following this podcast inside of whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. If you're in Apple Podcasts, then there's a little plus sign in the top right corner. And in Spotify, there's a button that says follow right under the podcast name. If you think of it between now and February, I would so appreciate it if you took a minute to leave a review of the podcast wherever you are listening. Doing so will help keep telling those darn algorithm robots that we exist, even while I am taking this season break, so that new maker friends might be able to take a listen for the first time. Thanks as always, and we will see you in the new year.
Hello, I'm Bryce, Account Manager and Sales Solutions Supervisor at Amico Brett, providing you with the best customer service in ceramics. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brett. Find Amico glazes and equipment at your local distributor. Welcome to Clay, and thank you for listening.
Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.